Hello, I'm Rabbi Spivak. Welcome to our program. One of the favorite Jewish sayings is Gam ze ya'avor, this too shall pass, hoping that when troubled times come, that they'll blow over. Will the troubled times blow over? We in America are facing troubled times as a Jewish community, as Americans in general. What does the future hold for us? That question goes through everyone's mind. My guest today is someone who is probably more qualified than anyone to answer that question for the Jewish community. He is Malcolm Hoenlein, who is with the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. He is a leader of that organization, and for many years has served the Jewish community as one of the most prominent figures in our midst. I want to welcome you to the program, Malcolm. Thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure always to be with you, Rabbi Yaakov, and to have an opportunity to talk about the critical issues that you address each week.
Now, you know, I think it's important that our audience knows about your family background, because not only do you have experience in what is going on now, as you're a confidant of presidents and leaders all across the world, but your background, we say, Ein Chacham Kebal Nisayon. There is no wiser person than one who is an experienced one. You want to tell us how your family got to America and what they went through and what they experienced, briefly, so that we can understand your background and what background you bring to your present experience.
Well, I believe it's very relevant, although this younger generation doesn't seem to have much interest, even in the Jewish community in the past. That's why the Torah gives this emphasis always on Sha'ala Bicha B'Yagetka, the Kenecha B'Yomrullah, that it's your parents, your grandparents, and they will tell you, unfortunately today, you see it in the general society, the cancel culture, and even in our own community, this lack of interest. So your question is one that is very rarely heard anymore, and it is very important because we are a product of our past, our collective past, and also our individual past. And I certainly am a product, and I acknowledge that the Shoah played a very important role in determining what I did. I spent my whole life, now more than 50 years, leading Jewish organizations, but even started as a teenager while in yeshiva and in Soviet Jewry and many other causes, certainly for Israel, from when I was 10 or 11 years old, because I really came to the conclusion that Jews had to be able to control their own fate, not live at the sufferance of others. That for too many years, Jews thought their position was good. Certainly in Germany they did, from where my parents came, and my father came on the last boat that left Holland in June of 1940.
Wow.
My mother escaped after Kristallnacht and crossed Germany and France alone as a young woman, and made it to America, to Philadelphia, where my father came. Then later, they had met on the operating table in the Jewish hospital in Frankfurt, where my mother was a nurse and my father was a patient. He had come to the yeshiva for Rosh Hashanah in Frankfurt, and having been arrested already in 1934 by the Nazis, and was expelled. So that influence, and my grandparents and much of the rest of the family was killed, so strongly influenced my background and their commitment, despite the hardships of remaining from Jews, and my father getting fired every Friday and having to start again to look for a job on Monday or Sunday, has certainly influenced me and my brothers, and now our children and our grandchildren. I hold that is all because of what my parents did, the sacrifices they made, sending us to yeshivas and to making sure we had the good Jewish background.
And did your parents keep their horrible experiences from you? How much was it brought up, and how much did it affect you when you saw it?
They did not discuss it, and I learned much of it actually on two occasions. One was I took them to Germany. My father didn't want to go, and finally relented, and we went to visit where they came from. We went to visit the cemetery where my great-grandfather was buried, and many other relatives from the 1920s, even up to almost 1930, and the synagogue where they davened, which was rebuilt. The drawings that my father, was an engineer, had made before he died, and at the request of somebody from the community, and they rebuilt the shul using his drawings as a diagram for it. And there's an amazing woman, a Syrian Arab actually, who took control of this and has built a museum and found the pot in which my grandmother made the meat kosher in their house, and other things, and she's put together an amazing display from this little community on the foothills of the Bavarian Alps. And it was only on this trip that I started learning about what both of them had gone through and what they endured. And then after my mother passed away, during the Shiva, actually, I started to look at some of the papers, and I found their passports full of Nazi stamps. My father's already had Israel added to it, and my mother's didn't, but she had to go through dozens of Nazi checkpoints during her time, and it's stamped in her passport as it was in my father's. And I followed the trail of where they went and how they escaped one thing after another, surviving, thank God, to come to America and rebuild their lives.
We're speaking with Malcolm Hoenlein. Malcolm, can you tell us, when we talk about the anti-Semitism of today and the upheavals in the American government and the ramifications of those upheavals vis-a-vis the Jewish community, we're always reminded that when you and I grew up in the 60s, there were also great social unrest of the Vietnam War, and people compared them and they said, well, that which happened in the time of the turbulent 60s, the whole world is watching, etc., is no different than what's happening today, and just as that period passed, so too will this period pass. Could you compare and contrast them and say and tell us if you agree with that assessment?
It's an excellent question. It's not just the period of the 60s, which we recall, but I mean, throughout all of the time. I mean, anti-Semitism is never absent. In every generation, our people have experienced it. They could be the color of the uniform has changed, the language, the geography, but the enemy was the same. And unfortunately, we've seen it expressed more and more openly, but it was always here. You had the Klan, you had David Duke, you had Lindbergh during World War II, you had so many American firsters, you had Nazi sympathizers and Buddhists, and throughout we've had the presence here of people in every community. You had the Farrakhan's and his predecessors that gave expression to anti-Semitism, but it wasn't fashionable. It wasn't something that you would do so openly as you can today. And we see it in some of the demonstrations that are going on now, the manifestations of anti-Semitism, the linkages to Israel, what they call intersectionality, which is really concocted. They're just exploiting the concerns over racism and that the demonstrations and taking them over to redirect them towards the quote Palestinian issue. We see it on our campuses, the blatant anti-Semitism and anti-Israel expressions coming from faculty, coming from students, without ample responses. We see it in virtually every aspect. We see it in business communities. We've seen it in other places where you have boycotts, where you have attempts at it. The difference is that the people in authority at least react to it. We have 36 states that have anti-boycott legislation against BDS. We have country after country accepting the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, as well as the United States government and the government that has openly expressed in very strong terms the Department of Education taking action under Title VI against universities where these kind of blatant expressions are accepted with no real action taken on many of them until we brought lawsuits, until we took other action.
We're
now beginning to see some change.
Let me ask you, Malcolm Hoenlein, you talk about it's more open and more blatant. In the 60s, was there as much anti-Israel and really anti-Jewish feeling in the Congress of the United States as there is today with the Ilhan Omar's, the Rashida Tlaib's, and the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Did we have it as much in the Congress as we have it today?
I think that you had it. It wasn't something that people took so much note. Remember, before the 6-Day War, Israel was the Nebuchadnezzar Israel, and then after the 6-Day War, all of a sudden now it's become the power, the occupier, whatever term they use against it. But you had Robert Byrd, you had so many people who were not friendly to Israel over the years, and some of them very unfriendly to the Jewish community. You had people who were former Klan members who were elected to Congress. So it's not a new phenomenon. The fact is that overwhelmingly still the members of Congress are supportive of Israel, they're supportive of the Jewish community. They take a stand against anti-Semitism. But the problem is that the few hostile people, this minority, they get all the energy, the media gives them all the attention. So those who are fighting to do the right thing and who are standing up for the right cause, they don't get the attention. And all you do is that you further energize extremism and legitimize it by virtue of who gets the credit, and the fact today that they can be much more open. That even in New York City, they can run candidates who profess to be supporters of BDS, like the person who challenged, the Omar who challenged, seemingly successfully, Elliot Engel for his seat, and is associated with AOC. I, for one, don't believe that we should give them more oxygen and more attention. I think we should work to see to it that their influence is limited, that we educate, that we reach out to the others who are elected, who are often ignorant of the facts. That's why the trips to Israel are so important for the members of Congress. You're not going to change AOC or Omar's attitudes towards Jews.
Malcolm, she got 70%.
400 plus others are the ones that we should be targeting and working with and educating.
Malcolm, she got 70% of the vote. This is after she turned down Amazon and billions of dollars in tax revenue and thousands of jobs and ancillary help for the little businesses and the people in the 12th congressional district of certain parts of the Bronx and Queens that didn't care. They voted, put her back again. I mean, are we turning into socialism that has a tinge of anti-Semitism with it?
Well, first of all, you have to look at how many people actually voted, and you'll see that she won the first race with, I think, 10 or 12% of the vote, and it was largely a group of whites, in fact, who lived in the White Stone Bridge area, who were very liberal, who elected her because nobody else turned down, and the guy who held the position, a key member of Congress and leadership position, ignored his constituency, did not do the job he should have done in campaigning and being present, and she won. And then once you're in, she has exploited it very successfully. I have to say, I give her credit for the way that she is able to manipulate and despite doing, as you said, not being held to account for losing tens of billions of dollars in New York City. I think today, with all of the budget demands, that money looms even larger. And the others, Omar, you don't see them introducing meaningful legislation. You don't see them playing a constructive role, and that's what many of their constituents are unhappy with that. But what we have to do is what I said is that I don't want to give them more attention. I want to educate the voters, the people there in the community, and that is the case. Omar has a very effective challenge. Whether she can win or not, we don't know, but at least you have to educate the people, and you have to get people to turn out. There are hundreds of thousands of Jews in New York alone who are not registered and who don't turn out to vote. If all of them voted, you could change who the president is. You could have such a big impact. And instead of complaining, Bill de Blasio, they all complain about today, he got elected with, I don't know, a quarter of the vote. People didn't turn out, nobody ran, and nobody cares. And now you pay the price with the bail reform and all these other things that are being introduced that are affecting the quality of life in New York. We want justice. We want to see a true system that is fair to everyone. But at the same time, you can't just have a revolving door of justice. You can't close Rikers. You can't do all these other things and then have the spike of murders. It comes from someplace. But we have to, we want to maintain Jewish life here. Jews need law and order. Jews, we're a tight society. We're an urban people, and we have big stakes in this. If people don't vote and should not complain then about the result.
Malcolm, I want you to explain to me, if you don't want to answer this question, I could understand why, but I want you to explain to me a little bit of this political process versus the Jewish people in America. One of the big supporters, or one of the people that AOC supported, was Gerald Nadler. Can you explain that to me?
Well, first of all, originally she said she was going to run somebody against Nadler. And I think that Nadler has been in the forefront of a lot of the efforts, impeachment, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that they just saw that they weren't going to beat him, so she cleverly endorsed him. I don't know what else to read into it. She also claimed to target Hakeem Jeffries, a black member of Congress, a leader in the number 3 position. She did not in the end, but she did say she would. And others. And I believe she will go after others to broaden her base. She suffered some defeats. Hopefully Richie Torres will win the congressional seat that's an adjacent district to hers, and she certainly did not support him. So it's not as bleak as to make, but again, it's because the media gives all this attention, and because she's able then to manipulate, because there's no accountability. There's nobody that says to Omar, who came up with all these scandals and things, that holds them to account, and the media gives them a buy. They don't give anybody else that in the same way, but it is a reflection. It's why it became so controversial about what the story the media is telling.
We're speaking with Malcolm Hoenlein of the Conference of Presidents. There are a lot of parents watching this that are concerned for their children who are going off to college if once things turn around in our present situation, and they worry as Jewish parents what kind of situation will their children face on the college campus. I can only speak from my own experience of the early 1980s as having been the Jewish chaplain for Fairleigh Dickinson University in New Jersey. And the administration, or one of the members of the administration there, told me that the Arab countries were deliberately sending students to these places, to these colleges, for the purpose of influencing the students and turning the Jewish students against the Jewish people and against Israel. What in those 40 years? How has the situation changed? What was I experiencing, and what does that result in today for the average Jewish kid that goes to a secular college?
Wow, that's many questions about a very complicated and serious subject. So first of all, parents should study the campuses before they allow their kids to go there. You have to look at what the atmosphere is. We're seeing a sharp rise in anti-Semitic incidents on campuses across the country, including physical assault, let alone administrations that won't take stands against professors or against events where Jewish students are denied their rights, or individually or in a collective group. The situation, I think, is somewhat different. I mean, we have a whole history of quotas in American universities. We're seeing quotas again introduced in some of the universities. We have a situation where the Arab states did pour tens of billions and continue to pour billions of dollars into our campuses, or certainly millions of dollars. Qatar, others whose interests are not consistent with what I think Americans want. And that 6 members of Congress, 6 separate incidents where they've gone to the Department of Education under Title VI to demand that universities be denied money as long as they allow the propagation of all these hostile actions or atmosphere, and started to hold universities to account. And donors, parents, alumni have to hold universities to account when a Jewish student is beaten up and no action is taken. When there's an anti-Semitic incident or faculty members and nothing is taken, it's our responsibility collectively of the students, the faculty, who will stand up, the donors especially, and alumni. Universities listen to them. And we have a situation today where the numbers, and I don't want to scare people away from sending their kids to school if they want to, but they have to check it out. Speak to the Hillel, look at the numbers from the ICC, Israel on Campus Coalition. We get reports regularly. They are so disturbing, and they're escalating. At API, the Jewish fraternity, I think 14 of their houses were physically assaulted last year, and they reported that a group of 100 of their leaders, and Frank Luntz, the pollster, while waiting to do something completely different, just said, how many of you have experienced anti-Semitism on campus? And 100 hands went up. He said, no, I meant you personally, did you? And 100 hands went up. And it is across the board. So we have created SCAN, the Secure Community Network, which is addressing anti-Semitism in America on a physical level, providing protection of training, and et cetera. But they also set up a 24-hour hotline so that students, especially, who feel isolated and alone on the campus can call up, report something, get support, and immediate assistance if they need it. We have other programs underway and work with Hillel and all the other on-campus organizations combined that have physical presence there. But this is such a serious issue in terms of the campuses are training the next generation of leaders. And we know that support amongst younger people is always lower towards Israel, and it changes as they get older. But at some point, they will change. And we can't afford this war, so we have to be more aggressive in countering the anti-Israel hostile activity, holding people to account, and doing the positive activities to get Israel's true message out and message about the Jewish people.
And finally, Malcolm, I want to ask you the question in caps. There was a man by the name of Sam Gitlow who lived in Spring Valley, New York. He was very prominent in the Joint Distribution Committee in the 30s, 40s, before the Federation came to the fore. He made his money inventing the coin-operated laundromats, and he called me in the 70s, and when I was writing for the Jewish Press, he says, I want you to print this story, and I want you to mention it on radio and TV, because before I go, he says, before I die, I want the world to know about this. In 1935, Sam Gitlow was the American representative of the Joint Distribution Committee, seeing to help European Jews. And he was sent by the Joint, he said to me, in 1935 to the Jüdische Gemeinde in Berlin, to the Jewish community in Berlin, where he had a message. He got up in front of the major hall in 1935. This was right about the time the Nuremberg laws were being written against Jews. And he said to them, gentlemen, to the leaders of the Berlin Jewish community, I have before me, and he said he brought a valise full of tickets. He said, and this was a time when Eichmann was helping the Jews get out, because this was before the Wannsee Conference, before they decided they were going to liquidate the Jews, God forbid, instead of getting rid of them. At this time, they were offering them passage out. He said, gentlemen, I have tickets here, steamship tickets. Get out. You don't realize what you're up against. And he tells me, Mr. Gitlow, he said, they laughed at him. He said, oh, Mr. Gitlow, take your tickets and go back to Spring Valley, New York, because the Fuhrer is not after us. He only wants the Ostjuden, the Polish Jews who were living in Germany at the time. So they laughed him out. And, the history remains what happened, the story. Everybody knows what happened after that. Where does American Jewry, the last question, Malcolm, where does American Jewry stand in its perception of the real world vis-a-vis anti-Semitism and the future of the American Jewish community? Is it as naive, you should pardon the expression, God forgive me, as the Berlin Jüdische Gemeinde was in 35 to Sam Gitlow, or is it more aware? Is it more a little bit paranoid? There's an old saying, paranoia is a disease which results in death at a very old age. Or Henry Kissinger, who said even paranoids have real enemies. How naive is the American Jewish community vis-a-vis the Berlin community in that time? Are we more realistic? And what do you get as the feeling of the American Jewish community in terms of the present situation of anti-Semitism?
Again, you're asking many questions which would require seminars.
Well, I got a chance to interview you. I'm not going to let it go. I mean, you know what I mean?
No, you're asking very important questions, and these are the things I wrestle with every day. I do believe there is a change in the American psyche. I think the events of the last violence, as I said, Jews need law and order. They need societies where you have a political center, which is disappearing in Europe and now disappearing here. When you see the rise of extremists on the left and the right, these are very threatening, for especially for Jews. And as I said, we're urban people where we have tremendous billions of dollars of investment in a city like New York in institutions and schools, hospitals, synagogues, everything that you can't just keep running. But I do believe that Aliyah will increase. I think a lot of people are raising the question about what life will be like for their children, the grandchildren, what direction America is taking. If we people talk about defunding police and talk about you have in the major cities such an increase at times of the shootings and violence, and we look at Europe, we see what's happening. That increasingly many countries in Europe are becoming hostile places or uncomfortable places for Jewish populations, with double-digit increases in anti-Semitic incidents, sometimes increases of 50, 60, 70%. I mean, to be the victim of a hate crime in New York, the number one target are Jews. We represent almost half, or more than half, of all the hate crimes that are committed against Jews. And increasingly, they include acts of physical violence, let alone harassment and other actions. And the internet has changed that, because it took Hitler months to spread a big lie. Today, it spread in nanoseconds. As soon as the virus hit Iran, the PA, many others are behind, and extremist groups get behind these campaigns online where they accuse the Jews of being responsible for COVID-19, and it catches on. And I think it's only a small percentage. It's a message that spreads. So people are beginning to feel, and they sense, and I see by the inquiries made of us, I hear it from my radio shows, that people are concerned. They can't exactly put a finger on it. They love America. They want to see America. It's been good to us, and they want to see America succeed, but they're afraid. And they see that the future for many of us will be in Israel. For others, it's not going to be everybody running, so we can't just say, abandon America, give up on America. No, that's not the answer. We have to work and make sure that those who can't afford just to move on. That has always been the traditional pattern, that the poor and the others get left behind, that we have to work to change the society. We have to make sure Jewish rights are protected, the Jewish community get the proper attention that they deserve, that the fights over some of the issues that we've seen, where there were certainly discriminatory actions taken by public officials, it's unacceptable. And we have to, as a collective community, whatever differences we have, the first thing we have to do is unite. We have to get people to vote, to register to vote. You have to make sure your political clout is there, that we support candidates that will stand with us and not just pay lip service to us, that we will advocate and do whatever is necessary, like we did for Soviet Jewry. If we have to take to the streets, we'll take to the streets. If it's a last resort effort, because we should try all of the diplomatic and other things that we do. And as somebody who took more Jews into the streets than anybody probably, for Soviet Jewry and Syrian Jewry and all the other causes, that I believe that it has an appropriate place. But we have to make sure that we are not accepting the conditions, that we hold people to account, that we teach our kids and our schools teach our kids about the need to be involved and to give voice to that involvement, because they will pay the price for it. And I'm very worried about the America of my grandchildren. And they talk increasingly about going to Israel for good reason. And they should go for positive reasons, not they should go for good purposes, as the fulfillment of life, not running. So
not the way your parents came here. Not the way your parents came here, right?
Right.
We've been talking with Malcolm Hoenlein. Malcolm, if you'll hang on after we roll the end of the show, I would just like to talk to you about some things. It's a very special feeling knowing that someone you grew up with and known since you were a youngster, like I've known, Malcolm and I have known each other. It's a very special feeling to know that that person is going to be a historical figure and is a historical figure. So when the pages of history are written, you'll be there, Malcolm, and for very good reason, for good things. A great askin, a great person, and who was given his life for the Jewish community. Thank you so much for being with us, Malcolm Hoenlein.
It's always my pleasure to be with you. And I remember the I remember the good old days with you. And it's a pleasure that all these decades later we can still remember who we are and be able to talk about it.
Yeah, it's great.
Think about what really is important. People should not be desperate, and people shouldn't be depressed. It should motivate us. And think about your grandchildren and their grandchildren, and you'll do the right thing.
Thank you again, Malcolm. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to roll the end of the program, so we thank you for being with us. Rabbi Spivak here on the Jewish Media Channel. We'll be back with you soon with more programs. Thank you for being with us. Like Gezut Lied Road, Shalom Al Yisrael, and most of all, my friend, Chazak.